Did you just feel this wasn't something for the long term?
At Renault, or at Alpine, the ownership had no idea about motor racing, and their expectations were not in line with reality. They wanted success overnight. They wanted me to fire everybody like on a football team. They wanted me to change 20% of the employees. And when I said, no, that's not the way to do it. I can't fire people that are doing a good job to change a culture. I just couldn't stay.
Hello and welcome to Formula for Success. I'm David Coulthard, and with me is my partner in all things podcasting, Eddie Jordan. How are you, EJ?
The old growler is here again. Poor Otmar, he had to have that in his ears for the first time, I'm sure, in a long time.
Yeah, well, there you go. You've actually preempted what I was going to suggest you do, which is to introduce our guest on this particular podcast. And it is a man that is well known, well respected within the sport. But EJ, you have a way of, let's say, not always putting people on pedestals. So how would you like to introduce our guest today?
In Otmar's case, I've kicked the pedestal away. How could you pay homage to somebody born in Romania, lived in the States, came back, infiltrated our sport, did all sorts of magic things. We've lived very close to each other for a very long time. He's considered to be a bit of a technical guru, but he's been around the houses. So very often I want to ask him as we get into the program, stability and people inclined to stay in teams quite a long time. And I'm just trying to figure out, was there an issue there, or he didn't like the teams, or he felt that he could improve himself? But DC, back to you, because you're the anchor man.
Okay, well, look, that was very nice of you to give us a brief summary of Otmar's career. Otmar, welcome to FFS.
Good to see you, David. Nice to see you, Eddie.
I believe you've, as we wait to hear news as to whether you're going to be back full-time within Formula One, you've been taking care of yourself. You've just come straight from the gym to join this recording.
Yeah. I've... a new year and a new leaf every year, January, February. I do a bit of a detox and stay off the wine and beer. So that's
really?
January. Yeah, every year.
Really? I don't believe that.
And people ask me, there's dry January. Why do you do January and February? I do 2 months, and the reason is if you do 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. Many people who do that tend to not have another drink of wine or beer or a weed dram again. And I do it for that long just to show the world I have the fortitude and the willpower to start again.
Yeah. I love that.
So the great thing about you and Otmar, actually, you're kind of kindred spirits. I know you're from Scotland and he's from Romania, but actually you both have hollow legs. You both can drink copious amounts of alcohol without having it seemingly affecting you.
I knew I shouldn't have mentioned that. It's not true, Eddie.
Hang on a second, Otmar. I'm going to tell them the last drink that we had. The last drink we had, to my recollection, we were sitting straddled the guardrail outside the Tip Top as you would come out of Casino Square, and it was early morning of race day. So that'll tell the people out there how serious we take our business. No, but it had been a long day, and we'd had a nice cool beer, and we had chatted about all sorts of different things. I remember that very fervently. It was very strong in my memory recall, and when you came on the show, I wanted to remind myself that I've spent many long times and evenings with you in good company, and we've always had a good laugh. Otmar, you're a proper guy, proper motor racing guy, doesn't take himself too seriously, and just gets on and does an outstanding job.
Well, absolutely, and we will certainly hear from Otmar again very soon. But I just want to share with you, when you talk about 2 months, Otmar, I managed 3 months once. When I say I managed, it wasn't difficult at all. But the reality is, it's just a bit boring. You know, I've got no problem with people who don't drink. I've got no problem with people who do whatever they do. But I did it as well, which encompassed an Irish wedding of a friend of the show, Harry Gibbings. Many of people within Formula One will know him as Oakley Harry, because he used to work for Oakley. But as we know him, he's got the lightest e-bike in the world, which is a beautiful thing. And he's got that business based out of Monaco. But I went to his wedding in Ireland, and I was surrounded by a lot of Irish all drinking. And there I was with my mineral water. And that was a moment of reflection of, yeah, I really need to start drinking again. I didn't do it at the wedding, but within the 3-month period, I did kickstart it again. So off of alcohol, and let's get into the early stages of your journey and career before we get into the bit we all know about, where you've been public facing. What was it that got you hooked to want to work in Formula One? Or was it one of those beautiful accidents where you realized you were just talented at leading people?
BAR.
First British American Racing for 3 years, then Honda for 8 years, and then Force India, that became Racing Point, and then eventually Aston Martin for 12, and Alpine for a year and a half. So I think if you add all those things together, with a bit of downtime in between some of those jobs, as we need to have by contractual obligations, I think I've been in the sport for 27 years now. It'll be 28 in August, so that's some significant time. But your question is, how did I start? And I think it was by chance that I met Adrian Reynard. I was racing a Reynard F2000 in America. I had my own team, and I think I had my own team because without having my own team, I doubt anybody would have taken me as a driver. So I was racing F2000. Reynard had just come over to America to go IndyCar racing at the same time that I was racing one of his F2000 cars. And I met Adrian through the fact that I was racing one of his cars and he was there IndyCar racing. And we ended up doing a project at Ford Motor Company together called the Indigo. And he built that car. He also designed it from a structural and engineering standpoint. The aesthetic design was done by Ford. And we were planning on actually producing the car. It was probably would have been one of the first. It was all carbon fiber chassis. It was a stressed engine, stressed gearbox, sequential shift gearbox. It had the 6-liter V12 that eventually made it into the Aston Martin in the back of the car, and it was quite fun to drive. We just couldn't get it past the CEO at the time. It was a little bit too much money for Ford to spend on a 2-seat sports car. So that's how I met Adrian. That was in the mid-90s. Thereafter, he was one of the founding members of British American Racing. He needed to hire a bunch of people, and he thought it was a good idea to hire somebody who had both racing experience as well as being a graduate engineer and having some project management experience. I had an MBA at the time already, and I was used to running projects, so he thought it was a good idea to hire me as his operations director. And that was in 1997. And after 6 months of leaving Ford, I actually started in 1998 with British American Racing. And I was their first operations director. I think I was 33 years old at the time.
That must have been tremendously exciting in what was, if I recall, British American Racing sort of assumed the Tyrrell entry, but you relocated and effectively it was startup. I can't imagine everyone came from Tyrrell. So put us in the sort of, EJ knows this well, but I don't. Were you like 50 people on the employment books at the beginning and you rapidly had to grow to, a few hundred?
EJ will remember this. Andy Green, who left Jordan at the time, was the chief designer. Malcolm Osler, who had come from Reynard, was technical director. I think Adrian was owner and chief technical officer. I was operations director. But when we started, so in February of 1998, there were 6 employees, 3 of which were new hires, including Andy Green and Malcolm. and 3 that came from Tyrrell. You're absolutely right to say British American Tobacco bought the Tyrrell entry, and I remember how much they paid. And it was a pittance compared to what the teams are going for today. And 3 employees decided to come over. Everyone else, many of them started another project with Honda and Harvey Postlethwaite, if you remember. They went to do that. And we had to grow from 3 employees in February of 98 to a year later when we were testing and running the car. We're at 225 when we went racing in Melbourne. And we designed and built and tested and went racing all within 1 year. And I look back at it now and it's incredible. And at the same time, we had to build a factory. And I remember Ron Meadows was in charge of looking after the factory build, Ron and Guy Austin.
Could that be done nowadays? I know it's the classic thing, and where there's a will, there's a way. Can it be done in the same way, do you believe, or do you think that those times have changed?
When I look back at it, and I think, how did we do it? Because it was done, and it was done in a year. And when I say in February of 98, there were only 3 or 6 people there, 3 new, 3 old, that's all we had. And then not only did we have to design and build a car, but you also had to hire the 225 people or 219 of them to get to where you're going, including a race team and purchasing people, all sorts of people, manufacturing people. But I think one of the significant bits that we had that enabled that to happen is the fact that we were located on Adrian's site where he designed and built all the Indy cars. And he would build 55 Indy cars a year. And all he had to do was increase that to 59 because we built 4 Formula One cars. So we did piggyback on some of the resources and the infrastructure that Adrian already had. And we were based on site. We're on Reynard Park in Brackley. Most of the people there were working for his IndyCar program. And then there was us. And we used their pattern shop. We used their composite shop. We used their machine shop. We used, sometimes their designers, they would design things for us. So the fact that we had that infrastructure at our doorstep meant we were able to do it. If you don't have that today, can you do it? I'm not sure. Even back then, I don't think we could have done it without that help.
Yeah. Well, I can see EJ's chomping at the bit to get stuck into you. But just, if I'm not wrong, Otmar, that Reynard Park and that journey that BAR were on, is that not the exact location now that Mercedes Grand Prix has taken over and become this very, very successful Formula One team?
You're absolutely right. So when we were there, across the little river was the Formula One team, and the rest of the campus or site was Reynard and all their businesses, and they had, I think, an airplane seat manufacturing business on site there too for Virgin, if I remember right. Anyway, all those other buildings, which at the time had more people in them than the Formula One team, are now Mercedes Grand Prix, including a new wind tunnel. So when I was there, we had a smaller wind tunnel in the back, which I believe now is a gym. But Honda built a brand new state-of-the-art wind tunnel as part of that project. So yes, that entire place now is Mercedes Grand Prix.
Great story. Otmar, I remember all those days, of course, and I'm just thinking about Villeneuve. Was he there at that particular time? It was just Craig Pollock and stuff like that. Tell me about, because it was a bit of an enigma. I always liked him, but he wasn't everyone's best friend, was he? He was kind of somewhat aloof. I'm not saying he was Canadian, because I don't know many Canadians, but he used to stand back, and unless you made good approaches to Jacques Villeneuve, you probably didn't get close to him. What was he like to work with?
Yeah, so he was there, and he was he and Craig were one of the 3 founding members, so to speak. So there was British American Tobacco that had the majority shareholding. There was Craig, I think, had 35%, and Adrian Reynard had 15%. And Craig and Jack were a team, as you know. So yeah, Jack Villeneuve was one of our two drivers in the first year. Ricardo Zonta was the other, and Jack was great in many ways. When he was there, he definitely wasn't slow, and because of it, you always need at least one super quick driver to show you where the car is. Always. Otherwise, you're questioning yourself. You don't know if it's driver, if it's car. Are we good enough? Are the others better than us? So Jack definitely was able to do that for us. And I remember in the first year, although we had a quick car, we qualified it very highly often, and we're running in the points often. If you remember back then, Eddie, they only scored points down to 6th place, not 10th. So it was harder to score points, but it wasn't reliable. And the reliability that we suffered meant we scored 0 points in year 1 of British American racing, even though the car was quite quick. But we scored none, mainly due to reliability issues. Remember in our first race at Melbourne, the rear wing came off down the straight. Oh, wow. You had that happen, David? I know, I think Mark Webber's had it happen to him, and Villeneuve's had it happen to him. I think you've never had that happen.
Well, I did have, I did witness my teammate Mika Häkkinen testing the McLaren in Barcelona. He went, I was standing on the pit wall, and he went past just when he hooked 5th gear, and the rear wing fell off, and he kept his foot in. He just thought that, the car suddenly had got really, really slippery in a straight line. And then when he braked at the first corner, of course, he never made the corner and ended up in the kitty litter. So, we can obviously joke about it in as much that, the drivers all walked away from those incidents. But you're absolutely right. Our initial era of all of us entering the sport, and you gents have been in leadership roles within it, but it was regular that we expected not to finish 20-30% of the Grand Prix, and we kind of factored that into our mentality when we went Grand Prix racing. Nowadays, they expect to finish every single Grand Prix, so that has to be a good thing. But do we feel that somehow it's taken away a little bit of the jeopardy as to who's going to be running at the end?
Especially at the beginning of the season, if you could finish that first or second or third race, you had a high probability of scoring points just by finishing. And I think that's changed due to FIA regulation mainly. And, now with engines having to last a quarter of the season and gearboxes needing to last at least 5 races, that's driven more robust design. And I remember at the time, Eddie, you'll remember this, we used to have, and you too, David, we had qualifying engines. And if you design to such a fine margin for performance as a qualifying engine that's only meant to last for 12 laps, then you design differently. And you design closer to the edge. And when you're closer to the edge between performance and longevity, you sometimes go over and you don't have that longevity. And it takes you time and races to understand where that edge is, come back on the right side of it, and then be reliable. And I think that's what's driven it.
AJ, was that a painful process for you?
The qualifying engine was a killer because, Otmar, just to give you a little bit of an idea, you'd start the morning warm-up on the Friday or the Thursday with the engine that you'd finish the race with. And then that would be pitched out because on the Friday there used to be qualifying in those days. And you put in a qualifying engine or a good engine or maybe even the race engine that you were thinking of using in the race just for that session. That engine then came out and then the old engine went back in for the early morning warm-up on the Saturday and then the real out-and-out qualifier engine. And absolutely, Otmar is right. It was designed and made and created with pistons and rings and stuff, so light and so tiny that it was geared maybe for 10 or 11 laps. And you would never be surprised if it blew up on the stand because that's the way it was. You just fire it up and hope to be gentle and kind to it and say prayers to it, because you needed it to go on the track. They were very fickle. It was a massively stupid system because of the cost involved. And then the race engine that you would use, that would then get used for the morning warm-up and the next race. So it was a nightmare. The mechanics spent, we used to change the engine in about 25, 30 minutes. That's pulling the gearbox on, dry brakes, dry systems. Otmar, you know what I'm talking about. But if I just may go back a second, Otmar, which is, you jog my memory. You mentioned Andy Green, who was obviously a great designer with Jordan, but Malcolm Osler. Malcolm was one of the key components of Reynard. With Johnny Herbert, we won a Formula 3 championship. With Jean Alessi, we won a 3000 championship. Him and Gary Anderson, I thought, were so naturally talented, brilliant people. I know Malcolm had enough and went back to live in Australia. And I think Formula 1 misses him because I think he was a genius.
Genius. In a word, a genius. And Rory Byrne also worked for Adrian, and Rory used to always say, and I didn't hear this from Rory, so it's secondhand. Rory used to say, Malcolm Osler is a better designer than I am, and that says a lot.
Yeah, that's super impressive. Well, out of those sort of startups, you both lived through that. So, do you look back on, for both of you, this question? Do you look back on that time as fond memories, or was the stress level, and Eddie's spoken about this before, Otmar, he's spoken about the stress of running a Formula 1 team, and we know EJ's the great blagger and the great survivor, but taking money from one place to make sure he can pay another place. But one thing EJ always said was that the team, the staff, your employees, they always got their payment. He might have deferred on paying a supplier or something else, but you've got to take care of your crew.
I 100% agree. I didn't suffer that kind of team until late on in Force India. When Vijay had his issues with the Indian government and all of his funds were frozen, and we didn't have enough external income from either Formula One or our sponsors to pay all the bills. And it was, I think, in a recent podcast that I mentioned, and I wasn't a team owner like Eddie. I was an employee, but I paid the salaries for everybody twice from my own savings. And that was done for just the reason you mentioned. The first thing you have to look at after is your employees. And, they're the heart and soul of a racing team. The rest of the stuff, you can buy. You can buy CAD tubes, or you can buy autoclaves. You can buy simulators. But the thing that sets you apart from the other teams is the group of employees that you have and how you work together. And if you don't pay them, some of them, start looking elsewhere, and then it disrupts the group. And if you don't pay them, even if they don't leave, everyone talks about, they missed a salary payment. So you're not really focused on what you should be doing, and it's so competitive that every minute of every day you should be working on Formula One. You don't want everyone talking about, I wonder what's happening. They didn't pay our salaries. You know what I mean? That takes up days of discussion. And if you multiply that by 400, 500, or 1,000, you lose quite a bit of time and effort on doing what you should be doing. Bernie Ecclestone once told me, he said, Otmar, if you're in Formula One and you work 24/7 on Formula One, you probably won't win.
Really?
But if you don't work 24/7 on Formula One, you're assured you will never win.
Bernie and his riddles. EJ, we've spoken before about Bernie and how you had to go to him many times to try and get an advance on prize money from the previous year. Is there any little quotes like Otmar's just shared with us that you remember from Bernie?
Bernie said, Jordan, I shouldn't say this, but you've a half decent brain on your head. Whatever he meant about that, I don't know. But anyway, what he meant was, he said, you learned at an early stage that you get money, remember this, and this goes out to everyone listening to the podcast, you can only spend it once. Once it's gone. He said that's why so many of the teams failed. He'd pay them and they'd all get high on their own supply, and Bernie would say, they've got their money, they're not going to be here in 6 months. And the reason is because they spent it on all sorts of different things. It was never structured. It was never planned. And, Otmar is alluding to the situation. His career path is not unsimilar to some of the things that we're familiar with Jordan. But at the same time, he went to Force India, which must have been the most daunting of all prospects. Because when you have an owner of a team who is traditionally known to have been very generous with the team, but I now talk about Vijay Mallya, and Force India was a great thing, and I loved what Otmar did there. And I remember speaking to some of the staff, ex-Jordan people, who adored Otmar. And Otmar knows this, but we can keep it private, and that is that I did several different discussions and negotiations to see how and where best opportunities might unfold for Otmar as we go through life and various other things. And one of the thoughts that I had, that it would be the natural progression, and this is a question for you, Otmar, what in your opinion, did you not want to go to Aston Martin, or did you decide that maybe it's time to move on to other aspects? Because that for me was where I thought that you would wind up.
So, I took on the challenge of Alpine, and the reason for it was I thought that I could take that team that was mid-gridish. We at Force India often beat them, and I could improve them, and I thought I would change a culture into a similar culture that I created, or I shouldn't say created, because I think it was there when you were there, Eddie. Maybe I resurrected, maybe that's the right word, at Dadford Road. Many Jordan people there, and I think one of the reasons that I got on so well was I think the culture that I really pushed was not dissimilar to what they experienced under your leadership, Eddie. And it was Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So culture is the thing that you really have to work on. And once you get that, then everybody works in the same way, they pull in the same direction. And teamwork, especially in Formula One, when you have 1,000 people, that's what it's all about. If everyone isn't pulling in the same direction, just marginally to the side, you're suboptimal and you're not going to win. Just like Bernie said, you got to be there 24/7 and you probably won't win. But if everyone isn't pulling in the same direction, for sure you won't win.
How do you go about that culture of getting everyone pulling the same way? Because it communicate with the race team, I understand that, because it's a relatively small group of people, but when you're dealing with hundreds of people, you can't have individual conversations. So is it about doing regular team meetings in the factory? I think it would be interesting to understand. It's really how you treat people, and you've got to treat them with due respect. Respect the individual. I used to always have a saying that, we got to make this place the best place to work in Formula One, right? And those are easy words to say. With all due respect to Eddie, when I went to Force India, it was the same factory that Eddie had, and the factory was relatively smaller compared to all the other teams, rightfully so. Like Bernie said, you only spend the money once, and Eddie had a philosophy of hiring in some of the infrastructure that some of the other teams had. So the facility was smaller. And because of it, you couldn't say this is the best place to work because we have a fabulous canteen, because we have a swimming pool, because we have a gym,
because we have all this infrastructure, big R&D facility. So you had to make it the best place to work in different ways. And I used to always tell everyone, you have to understand individually what that means to every individual and give it to them. You know, for some individual, a good place to work means the breadth of what I do for a Formula One team that has an impact on performance is bigger than at other teams. I have a bigger role. For other people, it's more money. You know, I don't care about the facility, just pay me. For other people, it's a pat on the back. You know, they want to have a pat on the back from the boss in front of their peers. For other people, it's time off when they need the time off to go to weddings or funerals or whatever it is. Formula One isn't all-encompassing. So you have to understand that for each individual and give it to them. And that's not easy to do. And the thing that I found the hardest was I live that, but my direct reports had to live that, and those reports underneath them had to live that. So the hard part was taking this philosophy or this ethos of make it the best place to work and instill that in all the managers in the organization. Make sure they looked after all the employees. And I wasn't successful at that. You know, we had people leave and within the organization that I wished wouldn't have left. You know, GP, for example, we lost a lot of people to Red Bull. Red Bull were close, and they were, just down the road and often recruiting. And we lost a lot of good people to Red Bull. And I used to keep thinking, we've got to be a better place to work than Red Bull. Hard thing to do, but that was my philosophy.
Wow.
Guru Joel left Red Bull after I think Padromo went to McLaren, and he thought he should get the top job at Red Bull in aero, so chief aerodynamicist. He didn't get it, so he decided to leave. And the number one place that he wanted to come to was Force India, and we hired him from Red Bull. And he came to us, but he came to us because he heard through the grapevine, through his friends, it's a really good place to work. You can go make a difference. And he knocked on our door, and he was a senior from Red Bull. And I remember Toto Wolff saying to me, why is a senior from Red Bull knocking on Force India's door, not coming to me? And there was a reason.
Yeah, well, that's great. The journey onto Alpine, you spent a relatively short period of time there. Was that just because you realised quite quickly that the owners of Alpine were in turmoil? As we now know, they've decided they don't want to make engines anymore, so they're closing down Viry, which was the location that created so many successful Renault engines over the years. And it looks to me, these are my words, not trying to put words in your mouth, it looks very much like they're just trying to package that asset to sell it on at this elevated valuations that Formula One has today. So did you just feel this wasn't something for the long term?
So when I look back at it from a macro perspective, David, at the entire ownership structure of Formula One now, in the days of Eddie Jordan and Frank Williams and Ron Dennis, Adrian Reynard at British American Racing, you had owners that deeply understood motor racing, deeply. Often came up from the lower ranks, either raced themselves or, were junior designers or mechanics or whatever it was. But they had a deep understanding of motor racing, that a deep understanding of Formula One. And when you get, even VJ, VJ raced himself in India, and because of it, he had some understanding of motor racing, and he left us enough time to make a difference. And if you have a deep understanding of motor racing, you know what it takes. You know that there is no messiah, there is no magic wand. It takes sustained and long and good work to end up winning, because everyone else is competent too. But the new ownership isn't like that. They have very little understanding of motor racing. They look at Formula One as a sport. They look at football teams that can change 5 players from one year to the next and go from mid-table to winning. And they think the same can happen in motorsport, especially Formula One. That can't happen. It takes a long time to sustain to sustain getting better year on year, to sustain improvement year on year, and eventually winning. And when you look back at Adrian Newey's success at Red Bull, it took him 5 years to win a championship. Mercedes' success when they bought Braun. Braun had just won a world championship. It took them 5 years to win again, to win another world championship. And those are teams that have done it very quickly. And not everyone can do it that quickly. So it takes time. And I quickly realized that at Renault or at Alpine, the ownership had no idea about motor racing, and their expectations were not in line with reality. They wanted success overnight. They wanted me to fire everybody like on a football team. They wanted me to change 20% of the employees. And when I said, no, that's not the way to do it. I can't fire people that are doing a good job to change a culture. It's not how you go about things. I knew it was time that they had different thoughts on how to run a Formula One team, and I just couldn't stay.
There was one person who didn't have the Formula One culture, which is Flavio, but he had some other great skills, as we both know, close to Bernie, knowing what was going on. Were you surprised, having been at Alpine, to be seeing Ocon and Gasly finishing second and third? I mean, that was a miracle time. I mean, you were watching that, I'm sure, from afar, and you says, oh my God, I never saw this coming.
They were rightly so. When you're down at that level, you have to gamble with strategy, and they didn't pit waiting for either a safety car or a red flag. And it's exactly what happened. You're talking about Brazil this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Because if you pit like everyone else, you're going to either score 1 or 0. If you wait, you've got an opportunity, if everyone else pits, to gain a pit stop on them. And a pit stop in Brazil is around 22 seconds. So that's what they gained on everybody. And, they did the right thing. They didn't have a car that was good enough to be on the podium. The only way they were going to get there is through strategy, and they made the right decision. So I compliment them for that. The strategists did a good job.
Well, Otmar, I don't know from David's point of view, and I'm not wrapping this up, but I'm just saying that I think the Formula One paddock needs you. I think you've got a wealth of experience going back all of those times. I know we fought hard and we didn't always see eye to eye, certainly at BAR, because you stole our sponsors. Which was Craig Pollock was a genius, I have to say. But
I was the operations director, Eddie.
I hated you. I still hate you. But I'm still able to have a drink. So let us, in this new year, when DC comes back off being dry, and you've done your 2 months, Otmar, I'm hoping to make a recovery to be mid-season, maybe Monaco, back in full flight. Hopefully things will work to my favor, and we can head down to the tip top, and we can have a very nice, pleasant, cool beer after racing some evening, hanging over the guardrail. They're special moments for me because you can't buy them, and you're just talking about rubbish and nothing at all, and I enjoy that time. That freak meeting, I think we were both on bicycles. I can't possibly remember how
we're both on bicycles, and I know they have a nice cold beer at the tip top, but if I remember right, they also have a good burger. And I think that's what you're eating, Eddie, a good cheeseburger.
No, yeah, I was on the burgers and you were on the beers. So I think that's about familiar.
And that's an institution.
Well, Otmar, look, I think this is an opportune moment for us to wrap it up before you guys have an online fight. But on behalf of FFS, thank you very much for your time this morning, coming fresh out of the gym. And always good to catch up with someone that's been a leader within the sport of Formula One.
Nice to see you. Nice talking to you. Nice to see you, Eddie, and wish you speedy recovery to 100% full health. And,
thank you very much, brother.
I'm not that big of a religious person, but I'm praying for you.
Thank you.
Beautiful words. Well, That's all we have time for. Thank you very much to our dear listeners for being part of this. And you can, of course, subscribe in all the usual places that you listen to your podcasts. So that's all from me. And that, of course, leaves just one final little sign off from the Growler.
Ah, the Growler.